let us go to the spirit of computation to discover what is to be done. Okay. So what is the major contributing factor for this? These ones are contributing too many leaves, right? Let me not have one at all, or let me have minimum number of ones, right? If I do that, how can I do that? Is it possible for me to do that? Okay, how do I split 20? I can split 20 so that all leaves have only 2. Only thing is, we have to be little careful in looking at the 20s. Let us look at 12 itself. How do I split 12 in such a way that I have only 2 in leaves? 12 I have split here, but there are 4 ones have come into picture. I don't want that, because it would be nice if I bottom out at 2. Okay, so I don't want to have 1. So 12 I will take. I will split into, well, that is one way. I can split into 6 and 6 also, that is not a problem. But 6 is something I don't want to split as 3 into 3. Okay, that is what is this, each 3 is giving rise to a particular. So whenever there is an odd number, now you realize it. If there is an odd number, when you split, one of them must be odd. Can you split an odd number both even? Not possible. Both odd? Not possible, because whether it is both odd or both even, they add to an even number. So I don't want to have an odd number at all. So 12 I don't mind splitting into 6 and 6. But 6, when I try to see I am getting odd numbers, so I am going to split as 2 and 4. 4 I don't mind splitting as 2 and 2. Similarly, now this is 2 and 4, and this 4 is split into 2 and 2. This is now wonderful. What is so good about it? This is 1 comparison. How many leaves are there? The number of leaves here are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 leaves plus 5 internal node, 5 into 2, so 10 plus 16. See, this was 22 and this was 18, and if I could do this split up, I could get it done in 16 comparisons. In other words, I don't want to have an odd split. If I don't want to have an odd split, when you divide by 2, it requires you to consider 4 different cases. If n is of the form, if n equal to 4k, split into 2k and 2k, no problem. If n equal to 4k plus 1, split into 2k and 2k plus 1, this is inevitable. You can't avoid it. It is an odd, so one of them is even and one of them must be odd. And n equal to 4k plus 2, this is what is important case. When n is 4k plus 2, I don't want to split as 2k plus 1, 2k plus 1. Why? Both of them are odd. I don't want to do that. I would like to split as 2k and 2k plus 2, and when n equal to 4k plus 3, well, this is inevitable. One is 2k plus 2 and another is 2k plus 1. But the point is, you can see that if there is an odd number, that gives you only one odd child, and that will give only one odd child, and so on. So if there is an odd number, it is going to have only one as a leaf. All other thing will be 2. Let us look at splitting 21. In this algorithm, in the same method, you split 21 and see what happens. If you take 21, 21 will be split as 10 and 11. That is not a problem. But 10 is going to be split as not 5 and 5, but 4 and 6. And this 4 will be split as 2 and 2, and this will be 2 and 4. This 4 will be split as 2 and 2. So everywhere you have 2 here. This 11 has to be split as 5 and 6. This 6 will be split as 2 and 4. That is all right. This 4 will be split as 2 and 2. This 5 will be split as 2 and 3. This 3 will be split as 2 and 1. So there is only 1. So you can see that if you look into the locus of this odd number, this 21 has given 11, 11 has given 5, 5 has given 3, 3 has given 1, and this is the only place where that odd number is present. Everywhere else you have only even numbers. That is because wherever it is possible we have got only even numbers and there is only one odd number that carries. So if n is of the form, now I am going to generalize. You can see what suppose n is 2k, right? My goodness, this stage is not meant for teaching. This stage is meant for only concerts, and you should have wall-to-wall board with the stage extending beyond the wall. Then only the teacher can reach the end. It's okay. If n equal to 2k, how many leaves each having 2 will be there? Just now we have seen there will be k leaves each having 2. K leaves each having 2. So how many comparisons will be done? K into 1. Because each 2 leaf. And how many internal nodes? K minus 1 internal nodes. Each internal nodes will have 2 comparison. So k minus 1 into 2. Therefore this is 3k minus 2. This is 2k plus k, 3k minus 2. But what is k? K is n by 2. This is 3n by 2 minus 2. This is when n is even. When n is odd, what is going to happen? I will show you what happens when n is odd. Suppose n equal to 2k plus 1. How many leaves it is? How many leaves it will have? It is going to have k 2 leaves and 1 leaf, and this will contribute 1 into k comparison. This 1 leaf contributes 0 comparison. So at leaf level you will have k comparisons done. There are k plus 1 leaves, and when you have k plus 1 leaves, how many internal nodes you will have? K internal nodes. Each of them will contribute 2 comparison. So that will be k plus 2k. Therefore this is equal to 3k. But what about k? K is nothing but n minus 1 by 2. So 3 into n minus 1 by 2. This is equal to 3n by 2 minus 3 by 2. Okay, 3n by 2 minus 3 by 2. So you can see that roughly it is 3n by 2 minus 2 all the time. In fact, if you want to write rigorously and in a mathematical notation, notice that when n is odd, this will have an odd half here, and here you have. So what I can do is I can add a half here, right? For example, if you take 7.5 and if you take upper integral part, it becomes 8. So the exact value of this will be upper integral part. When I take, I am adding half and I am subtracting half here. So this becomes upper integral part of 3n by 2 minus 2. And this formula holds good even when n is even, right? So whether n is even or odd, I have a case. If you split like this, then it is 3n by 2 minus 2. So naive method 2n minus 2. Okay, recursion bottoming at 1 is still 2n minus 2. Recursion bottoming at 1 or 2 is 5n by 3 minus 2. Recursion bottoming at 1 or 2 and careful split gives you 3n by 2 minus 2. What is 3n by 2 minus 2? From 2n to 3n by 2 minus 2, how much you have saved? You have saved n by 2, right? There is a reduction of n by 2 here. But what is n by 2 to this quantity? 25%. So this is 16% reduction, and here 25% reduction. So what is the second wisdom? When you try to do the divide and conquer, divide smartly. Okay? Divide smartly. This will contribute for efficiency. So, divide and conquer is, to summarize, divide and conquer is a recursive technique. Because it is a recursive technique, it is going to relate the given problem to a smaller problem. This will result in fragmentation. If you get to too much of fragmentation, it could contribute for inefficiency. So, try to see whether it is possible to block at a sufficiently high level. Also, don't do a mindless division. You look into the problem and context and then see what kind of a smart division you can enable so that certain nice computational pattern allows you to save significantly. When you combine these two, the improvement is significant. Okay? And this is the wisdom that we have got, and these are the two important parts. One is depth of recursion, another is the manner in which you divide. These are the two important ingredients of divide and conquer. If you want to gain maximum out of that paradigm, you have to be careful about it. If you apply it in a mindless fashion, what will happen? This is what will happen. You may not see any improvement whatsoever. And this will be in fact worse. Imagine a recursive program performing 2n minus 2 comparisons. It has so many function calls to make, so many recursive parameter passing is to be done. So if you actually run the code, the 2-pass algorithm will simply zip through. There is no function call, nothing. There is only a for loop execution, 2 for loops. The code is very simple to see, 2-line code, and this one is recursion and maintenance. Everything is a nightmare. And after doing all this, you don't gain even a bit. Okay? So the careful way to apply divide and conquer is to look for these two aspects and then, okay, improve significantly where it is possible. Now I am going to apply this wisdom in a practical context. In which context I am going to do, and they have done it. Where they have done it? If you take the sorting routine, when quicksort was invented and when quicksort was put into the library function for sorting, other methods were all very inefficient. When they were putting into the library function, its performance was not as predicted. Okay? So they were wondering why quicksort is not doing well. Because it is a recursive program, it has certain problem. So what are all the ways and means of speeding it up? Two features they were looking at it. Number one, okay, how do I do the partitioning in a clever way? Right? The first problem they have encountered is there anybody here who do not know quicksort? Please raise your hands if people you have, okay, you are not familiar with what quicksort is. I can very quickly tell you what it is without getting into the code or any such gadgets. 2 minutes of a description is sufficient. In fact, that is necessary for others also to recap. So let me do that here. What we are trying to see is the following. Suppose you are given an array, take a random array 15, 7, 8, 9, 2, 6, 21, 42, 3, right, 4, whatever. When an array like that is given, you choose a pivot to split the array into two parts. Usually the pivot is taken as the first item. When you take like this, how do you split? The way in which you do is, you start with a pointer here and a pointer here. The idea is, here I would like to have larger items, smaller items, and there I would have a larger item. Okay? But I see that this is small because it is smaller than 15. It is okay to be here. So I move this here. It is also okay to be here. And in this way I keep going, and then I find here 21. It is not okay to be there because it is larger than 15. And then I start from the other end. I want only larger elements to be there, but unfortunately I am finding something smaller than 15. So I have found out two positions where I don't want those elements. So what I do is I swap. So when I swap, I bring 4 here and I bring 21 here. After that, I move this over here and I move this over here. Again, I see that this is pointing to something larger, this is pointing to something smaller. I don't want that, so I swap, and when I swap, I get 3 here and 42 here. And now you see that this is pointing to something smaller, this is pointing to something larger, and they have come next to each other. There is no point in, so I have effected the partitioning. So what is the partitioning? The partitioning is all the items here are smaller, all the items here are larger, and what I can do is I bring 15 with the last item and I bring 3 here and 15 here. So 15 sits in between, all smaller items are here and all larger items are there. So this is what is the method called partitioning. So partitioning is effected by the following method. Put one pointer there, it's not actually pointer, it is simply array index, therefore an integer variable would do. I for this and j for this, I equal to I plus 1, j equal to j minus 1, and they come over here, and when they meet, you know that the point at which the boundary is reached, bring that item there, and now you have reconfigured the item array in such a way, all those things that are smaller are here, and all those things that are larger are on the other side. Now the problem is, when the array becomes smaller and smaller, it is quite likely that you will hit always on the largest or smallest item, and which would make one of the pointers to run off at the other end. For example, if you do not have any such number, what this will do is it is still smaller and it will go. Here there was a 21 to stop. Suppose there is nothing to stop, then it will go on and then it will fall off from the, it will even go past your j. J is there to begin with, but I will even start beyond j, and if you are looking for a condition that, for a terminating condition that whether I will be less than or equal to j, that is not going to happen, so it will get into infinite loop, logical error, all kinds of things will happen. Whether that happens by the migration of j on this side or by I on the other side, this is the worst nightmare, right? What will happen is the recursion, for nice cases like when they meet in the middle, no problem. But if any one of them runs off the array, from then onwards it is total chaos. Therefore, what you have to do is, you have to put infinity or sentinel. What is the sentinel? Huh? Check. No. Who is a sentinel? It's a god. Basically, sentinel you might have seen, right, in the Independence Day parade and March Past and all. One guy funnily dressed and throwing all those things up and down. He is a sentinel. He marks the end of thing. He will be dressed differently because that marks the end of the battalion. Everybody in the battalion will be dressed in one way. He will be dressed in a different way to show that end of the thing. So that exceptional. So if every value is less than, let us say 500, I can use 501 as a sentinel. That's not going to be part of input. So I know that that is not input and I can use that as a sentinel. In general, you can find some sentinel. You post a sentinel here because you are looking for larger and larger values. Somewhere it has to stop. Otherwise, if you don't find any larger value, you will be a loser. So let us put one larger value there so that eventually j will go there and hit it and then it will be stopped. If you don't have that, you have various anomalous condition. And when you put a sentinel, what happens? Every time you have to check whether you have reached that point, whether you are in the interior one or something like this kind of a check, and whether you have whether you have crossed over j. This check is to be done for every step of computation. So the internal logic gets complicated because of this, right? And so what I want is an ideal situation where I want neither this set nor that set to become empty. When that happens, I know that I am never going to run off. Something is going to be here covered by I, something is going to be there covered by j. Surely they are going to, it may meet either this extreme or this extreme, but certainly in a place where something more is left on this side, at least one element on this side and at least one element on the other side. Okay, this is very important. If that is guaranteed, then I don't have to worry about sentinel, I don't have to worry about boundary condition check. It will be stopped somewhere and it will cross over, and at that time you can halt and swap, and that logic will go through smoothly if I have a partition of that kind. So the first recommendation is median of the three rules. In other words, take three items, take the median of it. That means it will have one item smaller and one item larger. Use that as a splitter. And choosing two items and then finding the middle element is easy. It's a small overhead, but it saves hundreds of computation and comparison that you are finding, whether it is reach sentinel, whether I have crossed over, all those comparisons are avoided and things will go smoothly. And this median of the three has improved the efficiency by 15%. Okay? You won't believe, it's a very simple twist that is given. All you want to make sure is that the split is in such a way that both of them are non-empty. That is the kind of an intelligent split appropriate for quick sort. The second thing is, again, they don't want to fragment it all the way, and what they have done is the following. Don't recurse all the way down to two element or one element. Okay, stop the recursion when the problem size becomes less than or equal to some threshold value, let us say some m. Okay, so when you keep splitting, the split into, let us say 40 and 70, 70 split into 30 and something, you keep doing like this, and when you do that, one of them becomes 8. Don't make recursive calls now. That 8 you simply sort and then put it in that place, because you can sort that segment and then leave it there. Okay, so because of that, you apply a different sorting algorithm without calling. So there is a threshold value below which, when the problem size goes, okay, don't make recursive calls. Use some simple sorting algorithm which are very efficient for small numbers, like insertion sort. But that number, threshold number, is to be carefully chosen. If the threshold number is very large, then what will happen? The number of recursion you might reduce, but to sort those 20 items or 30 items, that would become a terrible overhead. Therefore, it should be small enough and it should be sufficient to save the recursive calls. So by experimenting, they have found out that roughly when m is less than or equal to 10, you gain some kind of a maximum efficiency. In fact, if m is set to be 20, they see that there is no advantage, because the sorting time of the base case becomes much larger, because it's an n square algorithm. Okay, and you don't want to use a heap sort and merge sort for that and make further recursive calls or have a data structure and other things for those things. That will be a terrible overhead. Simple, within the same array, make something and then sort it. That is some kind of an insertion sort or a bubble sort you can use. They are all n square methods, so n should be reasonably small to see the benefit. That small size threshold is identified as between 10 and 12, works out pretty well in most of the cases. Okay, so the second wisdom of recursion may bottom out at higher level is also used, and the second enhancement given to the quick sort is that make recursion, no problem, but when the problem size is, when a call is to be made on a problem of size less than or equal to 10, don't keep further calling quick sort recursively. Simply sort using an insertion sort and then go ahead with that. From there you backtrack. What quick sort does is, it will go further down and then produce a sorted sequence after all the calls are made. Instead, for those 8 items, make a insertion sort or bubble sort and then get the sorted item there and proceed further. Okay, and if you do that, the savings have been further from 15%, it was enhanced to 25 to even 30% was seen as a significant gain. The two gains that we have seen here is seen in practice, it is put to use, and the library function of quicksort is with these two enhancements. And you can test this yourself. You write a raw quicksort and then see how it works. You write a code for the quicksort with these two, with first one enhancement, then with the two enhancement, take the profiling of it and then see the running time yourself in milliseconds for, you can see the visible impact even for 300 to 500 elements being sorted in this fashion. Okay, and the difference will be quite marked and pronounced when you sort 1000 and 2000 and 5000 items. So generate 5000 random numbers, and on that you work on this, and you see how these enhancements are giving you the fine tuning of the code and making it faster and faster. Okay? And this wisdom you should apply to any recursive program. Okay? You have to apply this for any kind of recursive code. Applying this is recommended, and it will be good to do that. Okay? So these are the comments I want to offer, and in order to look into the right and smart way of doing, one way to look at is the recursion tree and the pattern and insight that it gives, and look into what the recursion does and where the hotspot is there, and design the splitting algorithm in such a way that those hotspots are addressed. If you do that, you can get the benefit out of the second hint, divide smartly. The first one is fairly obvious. Okay? With these remarks on divide and conquer, I stop at this point. Let's go for a short break, and then we will assemble back here to continue with yet another very fascinating paradigm called dynamic programming. Wisdom, which says if you forget the past, you are condemned to repeat it. You are able to follow that, right? So if you make a mistake, or whatever is the experience that you have, if you forget it, you have to keep rediscovering it, and then your life will be wasted on it. And it says you are condemned to repeat it. Really very contemptuous way of addressing that stupidity. Okay? What is this wisdom has got anything to do with computer science? Let us take a look at it. Let us consider the following simple recursive program based on a recurrency equation. Okay? You know Fibonacci numbers, so let us write down the recursive code for that. So when you write what is the Fibonacci number? F of n equal to f of n minus 1 plus f of n minus 2, and f of 1 equal to 1, f of 0 equal to 0. You can have it as 1. All right, it doesn't matter for us, whatever it is, for our illustration it doesn't matter. So you have base case values, and this is how the recurrence. Suppose you write a recursive program based on just this. How will you write a recursive program? Fib n, here you will write, and if n equal to 0 or n equal to 1, return 1, else fib equal to fib n minus 1 plus fib n minus 2, okay, and return fib, something like that you would write. This is a direct translation of this. Okay, recursive formulation is done, beautifully done, and the recursive program is also done. What is so dreadful about this? Now let us see how the code works. Consider the tree for 6. F of 6 will trigger f of 5 and f of 4, right? And f of 5 will trigger f of 4 and f of 3. F of 4 will trigger f of 3 and 2. 3 will trigger 2 and 1, and 2 will trigger 1 and 0, and this will return a value, this will return a value, and when this returns a value, again when this call is made, 1 and 0, and this will return, and again 2, 1, 1, 0, and here begins 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0. All these things you physically do. First this makes a call here, and this in turn makes a call, and this in turn makes a call, and when this returns and 5 is returned, and when f of 5 is ready, again f of 4 should be ready, again on behalf of 4 this is done and this is done, everything is done. So many recursive calls are done. Okay? Are you able to now connect what is happening here and what is written here? You are condemned to repeat it because you are forgetting it. You have computed f of 4 here, but when this function returns f of 5, again for f of 4 you do all these things and you repeat it. And again this one is triggering. So you see f of 3 is computed once here and again. And worse still, f of 2 is computed once here and yet another time here, again here and over here. So many times you are computing. That is because current recursive call is looking for this function and looking for the value that is returned. You have done all these things before, but you have totally forgotten that and you are doing again and again. Because of this, what happens? What happens because of this is the tree is exponentially large. How many recursive calls are going to be made? The number of recursive calls going to be made is also a Fibonacci number, right? Assume that Tn recursive calls are made on behalf of f of n. Then Tn equal to Tn minus 1 plus Tn minus 2, right? Therefore, the number of recursive calls that you will make, and each recursive call, each pair of recursive calls will contribute an addition. Therefore, Fibonacci number of recursive calls and Fibonacci number of additions, all of them are done. You know Fibonacci number, Fn is approximately phi power n. You know what is phi? Root 5 plus 1 by 2. Something like that, that is approximately 1.6. Why is this ratio called golden ratio? Huh? No. That is, why is this called golden number? It is? Okay, I have a recommendation for all of you, independent of what you do. Whenever you read something, read some related history, read some allied thing, and read some enriching material also. Spend at least 10 to 15 minutes on that, and that is very important. The reason why it is called the golden ratio is the successive, in fact, this is most visually appealing and geometric pattern. If you have, for example, a Fibonacci, successive Fibonacci number, this is let us say 8 and this is 13, and when you cut this, you get an 8 by 8 square, and here you are getting with the 5 by 8 rectangle. So initially if you have an adjacent Fibonacci rectangle, after removing a square you get 5 by 8, and 5 by 8 when you cut into 5 by 5 you get 3 by 5, and 3 by 5 when you cut 2 by 3, and 2 by 3 when you cut 1 by 1. So you can see that this is the executive's bay, this is the secretary's bay, this is visitors lounge, and this is the entrance. Everything is neatly configured and all of them have squarish structure, and it is a one rectangle space which can be partitioned into one square and another rectangle of similar type. Therefore, that can further be partitioned into a square and a rectangle of a similar nature, and so on. That is the reason why they get added up, and this ratio is called the golden ratio. And for temple architectures and pyramid construction and for variety of those things, this ratio is extensively used. Okay. So this is 1.6 power n. This is an exponential algorithm and exponential number of recursive calls. Okay. That is because you have forgotten it. So what is the answer? Jesus Christ has given the answer for this. Okay. How many Christians are here? Okay. How many true Christians are here? Put your hands down. There is no true Christians around. It is very difficult to be a true Christian. Extremely difficult, very demanding conditions Jesus Christ is imposing. He is asking to be very patient and stuffs like that. It is humanly impossible to be a honest and very true Christian. It's very demanding. The conditions are very strict. So what Jesus Christ said, at least it is said that he said it. There are many statements that are attributed to him. He said, go and write in a table. Why did he said that? Where did he said that? To whom he said this? I want those Christian friends to elaborate to other friends. Okay? Why? What is written on the table? What is to be written on the table? Okay? There are some important information and messages which are to be and few other original documents in Bible, and then tell me, make a Google search and tell me where, in which context he has said this. So what we are going to do is, we are going to write in a table, and this process is called memoization. Memoization means memo. It is derived from the word memo. You are giving a memo to remind, and then usually memo in our office context considered as something a dreadful slip, which when it is received you are scared, right? But here it is a reminder, it is to hold some information and so on. That is actual meaning of the word memo. It is used in a very abusive context in the parlance of office, but in reality a memo is it's for to aid your memory. Okay, just a slip which contains the information that you are supposed to have done or something like that. Okay, so memoization in operating the world of operating system, it is also called caching. Okay, whenever you want certain value, you store it in a place for a while, and if you want certain thing frequently, you use it and then storing them, etc. This is used in several contexts, this wisdom of when you want to use it, if you anticipate frequent use, keep it available at your disposal, make it accessible and available. If you don't, you have the cache memory, as soon as you use it, you throw back into the secondary storage device, and again when you want it, again you use it, and again if you throw it back, it is equivalent to forgetting the past, and then you are repeating that again and again, which is all those kind of page faults and so on can significantly reduce the performance of the system. Okay, so caching is used to that. So we have to cache the intermediate values. You store the values first time when you want to store, make a recursive call. But if it is available immediately, if it is already computed, you don't make recursive calls for that. So let us see how it works. So I am going to have an array f1, f0 is 1, f1 is also 1, 2 is 0, 3 is 0, 4 is 0, 5 is 0, 6 is 0, and all of them are initialized to 0. It is not computed yet. Okay. Now I am going to start with 6. I just see the table value, it is not computed. Because this is not computed, I trigger the recursive call. What do? I trigger the recursive call first 5. Is 5 available? No, it is not available here. So I trigger the recursive call for 4. Okay, 4 is also not available. So I trigger a recursive call for 3, and 3 is also not available. So I make a call 2, and for 2 I look at 1. 1 is available. So I return that value, and 1 is returned, another recursive call is made. Okay, this also returns a value. Now I am able to compute 2, and when it is computed in 2, I immediately store it. Okay, so what I do is I now make this into 2. All right, I am now making this into 2. Now on behalf of 3, the call related to 2 is over, call related to 1 is to be done, and when 1 is done, obviously this returns the value because the value is non-zero and it is available. So it returns it, and it computes as 2 plus 1 as 3. So I am making this 0 into 3, and now for 3 it returns, and the other recursive call is 2. I am not going to make a recursive call. Why? f of 2 is already available, I return that value immediately. Therefore, this returns 3 and this returns 2, 5 is computed and 5 is returned, and this returns, makes another call 3, but 3 is already available. So this has returned 5 and this computes 8. 8 is stored and 8 is returned here, and this is going to call 4, but 4 is already available and 13 is computed and it is returned. See how sleek the tree is? The same recursion. Okay. So what I am going to do is, I will make only one change here. If n equal fib n, right? If f of n is not equal to 0, return f of n. Else you are going to do everything. That is, I am going to maintain an array. That array value will be returned. Okay, it is an auxiliary array. It is simply a table that I am maintaining just to help my recursion. I look into the table value. If f of n is not equal to 0, I return that value immediately. Else, that means if f of n is equal to 0, then I make a recursive call, and here what I do is fib equal to this, f of n equal to fib, this one step f of n equal to fib, that is the computed value I store in that appropriate n, and I return fib. So what I am doing here is, when I come here, f of 2 I return, but then I update f of 2 here, and then I return this, and then f of 3 I update here and then return that value. So I have already stored in the f array certain values. So when I come here, let us look into the f of 3 call done here, which is different from here. Here also I am making a call for f of 3, because f of 5, right, has called f of 4 and it has got a value. It has to now get f of 3, fib 3 is to be done, but fib 3 call will look into f of 3, f of 3 is not 0, so it is going to return, therefore here 3 will be immediately returned. And here f of 4, whatever is that, 5 will be immediately returned. So this has returned 8 and this has returned 13, 13 will be returned as an answer to you. Okay. So my program, right, almost if you casually look at these two code, you may not even notice the difference, what I have done. Here I have added one line and here I have added one line. I just introduced an auxiliary array, and in that array I am storing some of the intermediate values that I have computed. Why I am storing that? I need that again and again and again later. So every time I need not recompute. And if I do that kind of a recomputation, it is such a tremendous waste of effort and the program becomes exponentially inefficient. You want to see that? Just without this code, comment this code and compute F30. Just remove the uncomment it and run F30. Okay? Without this, F30 is going to take few hours. With this, F30 you will get in less than a second. You can see to believe it. I have done only a very small twist. I haven't done anything more than that. How did I obtain this insight? I now looked into the tree and then I have this problem, and how do I characterize this problem? The fundamental problem here is why it is that certain subproblems are to be computed again and again and again. Now you see the following. 5 also requires 4 and 3, 4 also requires 3, 5 also requires 3. Okay? So there is an instance, there is a problem, there are 2 subproblems, 6 has got 2 subproblems, but both of them have got a common sub-problem, right? And if that sub-problem If it is repeatedly done, you have a disaster. But if you store that value, that sub problem is performed only once, solved only once, and every time that occurs again and again later, you are saving all that computation. For example, 2 is needed for 4, 2 is needed for 3, 2 is needed for 5, 2 is needed for lot of things, right? It is a sub problem. In fact, it is a common sub problem. When you have a common sub problem, that is where this creates a big confusion. So, I am solving, here is a recursion, I am solving the instance of a problem by relating it to a smaller instance. That is why it is recursion. Now, you look at decremental algorithm. In the decremental algorithm, I have a function, it makes a recursive call to something smaller, which is smaller and so on. It goes as a chain. Okay? There is no problem in that. The chain can be long or short depending on how you decrement. Do you decrement 1 by 1? Do you decrement by a factor of 2? But it is still a chain. In divide and conquer, I am relating it to 2 subproblems, but although I am relating it to 2 subproblems, they are disjoint. That is the reason why I have a tree, but that tree is solving disjoint entries, disjoint subproblem. Whatever you solve on the left side has nothing to do with the problem instances you are solving on the right side. They are different. They have to be solved anyway. Therefore, when you use a divide and conquer, there is no overlapping sub problem because these sub problems are disjoint. You split the array into 2 disjoint parts and on them you further split and go. Okay? Therefore, there is no need to work with a table or something like that. In fact, there is no repetition of any subproblems. Every subproblem is computed once and only once, and the needed subproblems alone are computed during your course of recursion. So, you do not have to store anything. If you store those subproblems solution in a table and all, it is going to be only a useless overhead. You are not even going to use it again anywhere. Only when you are using it again somewhere, you need to store the value to avoid recomputation. Where will that scenario of using again would come? It will come when you have a problem has 2 subproblems and those 2 subproblems have a common sub-subproblem. If that is there, then once on behalf of this you would compute, again on behalf of the other one you would compute, so it gets duplicated. And sometimes the duplication could be so phenomenal that it will lead to exponential algorithm. And if you could avoid that, but this tabular method, immediately it becomes efficient. So, recursive formulation is a natural problem solving tool, but look into the property of the recursion. Is it a chain? Is it a tree? If it is a tree, is it made up of disjoint one or is it made up of overlapping subproblem? If it is disjoint, divide and conquer is appropriate. If it is overlapping, don't simply write a recursive code based on the recursive formulation. If you do it, it will be a disaster invited. You just have to do this. In other words, which are the subproblems I have to store? How do I know which one is depending on what, and all those things you have to worry about. In other words, when you have overlapping subproblems for a given problem, you have to first identify the subproblem space. So, what I mean by subproblem space is set of all possible subproblems that would arise in the context. Then, after looking into the subproblem space, you have to look into the dependency pattern. Why we have to do the dependency pattern? I have to see which one I should compute first, which one I should compute later. So, the first one which you need to compute, you compute and store that value. Later on, when the dependency calls for it, You just look into the table and then return the values, much like I did here. Okay, much like I did here. Later on I can. So what happens is, I must have a kind of a dependency relation between, okay, study the dependency relation among subproblems in this space, and this defines the order in which subproblems are to be solved. Okay, it is this that defines the order in which the subproblems are to be solved, and once you determine the order, you solve them. Typically, this order will be the increasing order of size. Okay, from the smallest instance to the subproblem to the largest instance of the subproblem, you would gradually grow, so that the subproblems, whenever it occurs at a later stage, simply consult the solution which you have built already. And this defines the order of the subproblems that are to be solved, and in that order you are going to solve and do what is that important thing? Follow the Jesus Christ. Write it in a table. Okay, solve and store them. So where will you store them? Typically in an array you are going to store. In fact, the term dynamic programming refers to, it has nothing to do with computer programming. This was created, this technique is created by a person called Richard Bellman. These are all the problems, optimization problem solving technique, and the optimization problems are extensively handled using dynamic programming as a key technique, and Richard Bellman has promoted this one. And this was done well before even the first digital computers were ever even used. Okay. So what do they mean by programming? What they mean by programming is tabular method of solving a problem. What do they put in the table? They put in the table solutions of the subproblem for later use, so that they avoid recomputing again and again and then do it. What is the dynamic about it? What they do is, the table is built on the fly as you do the computation. Okay? It is not that we are going to have one table forever and then keep consulting it. Depending on the input instance, the table values would vary and the table will be constructed once the program begins. So basically the entire algorithm will look like a plan for building the table systematically, organizing the subproblems and solving them in a systematic way, in a way that I do not repeat the computation of the solution of any subproblem, and I would solve once and only once, and later on, if the dependency demands that I need a solution for it, I would rather consult a table than to recompute. This is all about dynamic programming. Okay? So dynamic programming is, to summarize, a tabular method of solving a problem by maintaining in a table the set of all solutions of the subproblems. Which subproblems? That is what is defined by the subproblem space. Okay? So as I have told you, this is an appropriate technique for optimization problem. Although for direct recursion handling this is useful, this is predominantly used for optimization problems. Okay? When you solve the optimization problem, the subproblem space becomes compact and simple if the optimization problem has the following interesting property. This is called principle of optimality. Principle of optimality can be stated in a fairly complicated manner, but I will tell you in a very simple way to understand the principle of optimality. The principle of optimality says optimal solution is made up of